Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome to Returning Home. I'm your host, Natalie. I've been having one of those weeks. A lot of things going on. Kind of hard to focus sometimes. And when that happens to me, I try to look outside of it. And I look to what people are asking me about the show. And I keep getting this recurring question. And I haven't discussed it on the air. So I think I'll discuss it today. What do you do when you leave to handle the people that you leave behind? I'm talking about parents that you leave when you move to Israel, maybe grown children you leave when you move to Israel. How do you handle that? And people ask me that because it's one of the reasons that people don't make aliyah. It's the guilt or the closeness or the fear. And I get it, it's leaving. It is leaving. I remember when we left, my own parents said to us, "You're taking our grandchildren away." It's hard to hear that. And it's hard to argue with that because they have a very good point. I mean, they saw them as babies, and then afterwards they just saw them once a year. So it's hard. And I don't have a great answer. What I can say is this is for everyone. And if you can convince your parents or your grown children to come here, do. And you don't have to convince them by talking about it all the time and urging them all the time. You can just have a good life here and share as much as you can and maintain the ties, maintain the relationships as best you can so they'll want to come here. They'll want to live here. They'll want to continue their lives here. That's really the best you can do. Just be positive and establish yourself here. Establish a life here for yourself. If you had stayed there, if we had stayed there, I wouldn't be living on my parents' street. I probably wouldn't be seeing them more than once a week, maybe even more than once a month. I don't know where we'd be living today. People in America move all over. So if that helps all of you who have been asking that question, I hope I did. Stick around. Very cool story when you come back. You don't want to miss it.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Ezra Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome to Returning Home. This is your host, Natalie Sapinski, and I welcome to the show Ezra Shapiro, who is Oleh, who's been here many years already, maybe 10 years. You can correct me, Ezra. Ezra used to be
I've been here for almost 20 years.
Wow. Well, I was really off. Okay, so Ezra's been here almost 20 years. I don't know Ezra so well. We met years ago, 15 years ago, around there, when I first came to Susia. And, there aren't many Americans here. This was one. And we quickly met. And, then he left. He got married and left, I think. So I know he's an interesting story. And I asked him to come on the show because not only are there very few Americans down here in Har Havron and in Susia, but Ezra comes from a very unusual place in America, I think Omaha. Is that right?
My parents currently live in Omaha. That's right.
All right. So let's go. Why don't you tell us how you ended up being a religious Jew in Israel, coming from Omaha and actually coming to be in Susia?
I was born in a much smaller place in the Midwest called Sioux City, Iowa.
Okay.
And I was raised there as a conservative Jew. My great-grandfather moved from Russia to America, and he settled down in Sioux City. And my grandfather, his son was born there, and my father was born there, and then I was born there.
All right. So you are a third generation American?
Yep.
All right.
Third generation Russian American.
Okay. Okay. You're how old are you? You're in your 30s, 40s?
I'm 44. And at the time, I think there were probably maybe a few hundred Jewish families in Sioux City. And I think there's probably less than that now.
Uh-huh.
At the time, there were three shuls. One was Reform, one was Conservative, one was Orthodox. And they used to kind of intermingle and help each other out to make minyans. I remember people calling us on the phone to have my dad join a minyan for Mincha or for Ma'ariv. But, you know, we drove to shul on Shabbos, and we would go every Friday night. We would go to synagogue and then have dinner either at my parents' house or at my in-laws, my grandparents.
All right. So you were raised with a pretty strong Jewish identity doing stuff like that, right?
Definitely. Strong Jewish identity and a very Zionistic environment. And
Okay,
then
well,
when we
you
moved-
know, strong Jewish identity doesn't always mean Zionistic. Did you know people who had gone to Israel? Did you know any Israelis back then?
So when we lived in Sioux City, we had Israelis stay by us twice. There were Israelis who came like on an exchange program, I think in high school. And there were also Israelis coming to the Jewish Community Center in Sioux City that did kinds of activities. And also at camp, when I was at Herzl Camp, there were Israeli counselors. So
Herzl Camp.
yes.
Great.
Do
Okay,
you
so
know
you were
Herzl
all
Camp?
in. You were definitely all in. Okay, so it's not really such a surprise when I hear a background like that you ended up here. But take us through what happened, and then we want to get to when you're here, because once you get to Israel, I think the real adventure starts, right?
I try and keep the boring bits out.
Okay.
When I was 10, we moved to Atlanta to a similar kind of community, and when I was 12, we moved to Omaha, Nebraska to another similar community. And when I was 16, I was already in high school and in two different Jewish youth groups. And with USY, I went to Israel on Israel pilgrimage, which was a trip that I thoroughly enjoyed. I still remember it well. I'm still in touch with people from it. At that point, I had put on a yarmulke in Israel, and I fell in love with the country. I loved it. I loved the people. I didn't ever see myself living here, but I could see myself going back for a visit. And when I got time to go to college, to go to the University of Iowa, I told my parents, look, I want to do my junior year abroad. And they said, no. And I said, why not? And they said, you'll never come back. And it turns out they had the last laugh, kind of. They're not so happy about the fact that I'm so far away. After university, I finished student teaching for a math teacher's position. And I traveled in Australia, and I traveled in Europe. And eventually I had to make some decisions. And I decided that I want to go to Israel to learn Hebrew.
I'm gonna slow down.
Okay.
You first of all, I know you're a techie type of guy. So you're telling me you're a math teacher. I thought you were some kind of computer expert. I guess it's the
Right.
same.
So I finished my math degree with a teacher's license, and I did that in Australia. The student teaching started in Sioux City. I asked the student teach, and they split the student teaching for me. I also wanted to go to a program in Australia to student teach there. And at that time, I thought it would be a little novel. They asked me if I had any special requests. I thought it would be a little novel to at least go to synagogue once in a while. And I didn't have a car, so I asked if I could be within walking distance of a synagogue. I didn't really have it in mind that I would be Shomer Shabbat in that sense. I just wanted a way to get to synagogue at all. And so this guy with a really thick Australian accent, which I won't try and pretend to do, calls me up and he says, his name is Jock, and he's from Melbourne, and he wanted to welcome me early and let me know he's got great news. I'm within walking distance of 13 synagogues.
Wow.
And I don't know which of us thought that was more of a gag, him or me, because he wasn't Jewish. That was my first phone call from a guy in Australia saying, yeah, great news for you. You're really close to all these synagogues.
That's okay. So that was before you even got there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can't say I didn't frequent the synagogues very often, but I had the option.
Okay.
And I met Jewish people there and some Israelis, but life there became kind of stagnating. And so I continued traveling. And like I said, I went to Europe, and then I actually came back to Australia, and I had some introspective decisions to make.
All right. So let's just, clarify where we are in your life at this point.
So at this point, I'm in Melbourne, Australia, and I'm managing an internet cafe.
How old are
One
you?
of them, 23, 24.
Okay.
And I'm managing an internet cafe, a 10-minute walk away from the beach in Melbourne on a really happening street. And everything there is, young and hip and cool, and not family, and very upbeat, just kind of.
You're like living the dream life of a single guy, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was having a great time, and I thought to myself, I got to really make a good decision, lifestyle-wise. Like, if I get married here, what is my life going to be like? All I know is this in Australia. And this wasn't for me a lifestyle forever. It was just that it didn't feel right just to stay in that environment. Okay. And I saw people growing old there, single, and that was scary. And I'm a very family-oriented person. So I had some decisions to make, and I went to the local shaliach, the Israeli embassy, and I said, I want to go learn Hebrew on a kibbutz, because I had it in my mind that if I could learn Hebrew, and this might take some people by shock, because it was very, very haughty of me to say, but I thought if I could learn Hebrew, I could just determine from the Torah why it was that Jews don't really have to separate their milk and meat utensils.
Wow, you were one of those out to prove that
yes.
Keeping kosher made no sense. Okay, this is interesting. Go ahead.
I didn't mind the keeping kosher part. I was able to somehow figure out don't boil a kid in its mother's milk, to accept that meant don't mix meat and milk, but why the dishes?
Okay.
And so that was a big stumbling block for me for a long time. And that was the whole reason I wanted to come to Israel in Hebrew. It dissolved pretty quickly, but that was still pretty much the reason I came. And he said, well, look, if you want to learn Hebrew, you have to go to a religious kibbutz. And I said to him, I'm not religious. And he said, that's fine. Just you have to keep their ways. And I said, well, I don't wear a yarmulke. He said, that's fine. You just have to respect them. And I said, I like to jog outside topless. And he said, you can do whatever you want. You just have to respect their ways, and on and on. I said, I don't keep kosher, don't keep Shabbat. And eventually I got to this religious kibbutz, right? I made a flight to go to Israel to be on this kibbutz for learning Hebrew. And I remember getting picked up from the airport, and this cab, they bring you all the way to the kibbutz.
What kibbutz was it, Ezra?
It's called Kibbutz Yavne.
Yavne, okay.
Kibbutz Yavne is a pretty well-known kibbutz. They export olives all over the world, really high-quality olives. They're a pretty successful kibbutz. So we come within probably 2 or 3 miles of the kibbutz, and I'm like, there's a really bad smell in the air. It was clear that there were like cow farms somewhere nearby. What I didn't realize was the cow farms were at the kibbutz. And he starts driving into what he says is a kibbutz. I said to him out loud, you must be wrong. This isn't a kibbutz here. There's a cow farm here. He says, no, this is the kibbutz. And I mean, we literally passed the cows and where they milked the cows, and maybe about 200 yards, I'm saying yards instead of meters for your listeners, later, he drops me off at this decrepit building and says, you're here. The decrepit building was the Ulpan. It was where all the students who were learning Hebrew were supposed to stay. There was one person there. Her name was Johanna, and she was from Cuba, and she spoke Spanish. And I asked her in Spanish, because I spoke a little at the time, where is everybody? And she says, they're at a party. I didn't realize it, but I arrived there on Purim.
Big night. Yeah.
We went to the party. And I was asked out right away, why don't you have a yarmulke on? And I said, oh, here we go.
Oh, God.
I was a little disappointed, to say the least. But, I learned that, okay, I have to wear my baseball cap. And to run, if I wanted to run at all, especially without a top, I had to run out in the fields. And there was no such thing as not keeping Shabbos there. The whole place was shut down. And there wasn't anything such thing as keeping not kosher. So there I was, and I started learning Hebrew. For 5 months I was there.
So you're saying 5 months, but how many hours of the day are you actually learning Hebrew?
So we were learning Hebrew, I think, about 6 hours a day. in a full intensive program. Like they didn't speak to you in English in order to teach you Hebrew, because there were people there from, I think in my Ulpan, 17 different nationalities.
No common language.
The
Right.
only thing we could do was learn how to read her sign language and Hebrew.
And a lot of charades, right?
Yep. And so we learned Hebrew together in the mornings until the afternoons. In the afternoons, we had to work on the kibbutz. And I was in the olive packing plant.
Oh, well, how lucky for you.
Yeah.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things. But at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
Welcome back to Returning Home. We're continuing our talk with Ezra Shapiro, and he's telling us about his experience on the kibbutz.
We were on this kibbutz, and there were programs there, right? In the afternoon, sometimes people would come and talk to us, and we had some excursions to see Israel and other things. One day, a whole group of people, one after the other, comes and starts talking about us about what we do after the Ulpan is over and we're in Israel to live. And I looked at the girl next to me who was from Sweden, and I said to her, I'm not planning on staying, are you? She says, no. I said, then why are we having to listen to this? She says, because all the other Russians here, they're all immigrants already, and they have to listen to it, and that's it. I had no intention of staying, neither did she. But I think by the end of our time on the kibbutz, she actually left Israel, but at the end of the time, my time in the kibbutz, I was ready to stay. My mind had changed. I was happy here, feeling like a Jew with a Jewish identity in a Jewish place, where like the number of synagogues in a neighborhood is like the number of churches in a neighborhood in America where I grew up. And I thought to myself, I really get why Christians might like living here better than what I liked living there. And here I felt really at home, even though the quality of life was different, but it was so much more at home. And so I made this decision. I want to move here. Right?
Great.
This was at the end of a 5-month period. I hadn't necessarily become religious, but I was a little more in touch. I'd been reading a lot of Torah.
Look, you lived here, though. I mean, once you're here for that long, it does feel like home. And things that maybe in your other life aren't noticeable or aren't even beautiful change in your eyes. It's true. Right?
Yeah, I fell in love with the country. I was the Zionist in me really woke up, you know?
Yeah, it's an experience. It's really an experience. So that's amazing. So that's great. So you're 26 years old now. I'm guessing 25 years old. You just finished 5 months, kibbutz ulpan.
And I speaking relatively good Hebrew. Like my sister minored in Hebrew in college and could not understand me at the speed I was speaking.
Sure, you were living it.
Right. And I was making a huge effort to learn it.
Yeah, good.
So I went home and I said, I'm making aliyah.
Oh, you left Israel.
Yeah, you had to leave. I understood that if you want to go to make aliyah, you have to actually do it from America. It's
that sounds crazy, and I don't think it's true. But whoever told me that,
I don't think it's true either.
Yeah, it's not true. Not true.
I don't know if the easier way of doing it might have actually been that way, though. There was a lot more in process for Americans to do it from an American consulate.
Okay.
Israel, whatever.
Okay.
So I went back to America and I prepared to make aliyah, and everyone's telling me, you should hold off. Eventually somebody said to me, why don't you hold off a little bit? Just 1 more year or something. Maybe you'll get married and your wife will like to enjoy some of your aliyah benefits. And I said, okay. So that was convincing because family oriented. I thought maybe my wife could have a better time with that. I didn't.
And you at the time did not have a fiance. Am I right? I mean,
Oh no, I was looking.
Okay.
I think I've been actively looking to get married since I was like 13.
Okay. That's funny. Okay.
But at the time, I have a cousin named Jamie, and she called me when I was in America after the Ulpan and said, I'm going to Israel. Would you like to go back with me on this program called Wujis and Arad? And I said, oh, no. I said, they taught us about that when I was at the kibbutz. It didn't look very interesting. But she's really persuasive, my cousin. And she said, have another look at it, will you? I really want to go together. It's a post-grad program. Best decision I ever made in my life.
Yeah.
And like one of the best, getting married to my wife was a good decision, but I'm saying this was a fantastic decision. I felt like I was in a huge state of growth, which we all love growing. People, when they grow, they're happy.
Yeah.
And in Hebrew, there's words that allude to that, right? The word for happiness is simcha.
Yeah.
And the word to grow is smicha with a tzaddik at the beginning. And people are really only truly happy when they're growing.
Sure. Movement, motion.
Right. And
progress.
And it was so amazing.
I love it. Oh, it's great.
I've
heard of this program, which is WUJS. Now, we had a guest last week, 2 weeks ago, Al, the baseball teacher who lives in Arad, also did that program. He told us the same thing. It's been around for years.
It's folded a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's over now. It's a shame, but it was very successful. I remember. I don't think there was anything like it in Israel.
40 some odd years in the running. It was an amazing program that focused on what it's like to live in Israel. There was a Hebrew Ulpan component. And in addition to that, there were all afternoon a whole array of different kinds of learning things that you would put together your own curriculum. There were art classes, there were religious classes, there were science classes, there were history classes, and everyone did what they felt was best for them. In addition to that, you got an adoptive family. So I asked for a Sephardi family that didn't want to speak to me in English because every Israeli I'd come into contact with said, talk to me in English. And I'm like, no, I want to learn Hebrew. And I got a Sephardi family that didn't want anything to do about English. I was learning a lot more Hebrew at this time and also becoming more observant.
That's great. So tell me about how you ended up in Susia.
All right. So from Wujis, with the adoptive family, there was one of the son in the family was learning in a seminary in Otniel, which is not too far away from Susia. And so he took us there for a Shabbat. Me and my friend, and I loved it. I was like, oh, I got to come here and learn Torah. I got to learn what this is about. And they have a very large and successful pre-military yeshiva there. So I was a little overaged for that, but they were willing to accept people my age once in a while. I felt like it would be inappropriate for me to go and learn in a yeshiva, though. I wanted to first kind of get my mindset out of my previous lifestyle temporarily so that I could go and learn some Torah. So I said to myself, it's about time I go and be a shepherd, right? I thought it would be so amazing to be a shepherd and to...
Now, okay, first of all, you don't remember how you came up with the whole kibbutz idea. How in the world do you come up with this idea to be a shepherd?
So that was a little easier, right? Abraham was a shepherd. Isaac was a shepherd. Jacob was a shepherd. All of Jacob's sons were shepherds. Moses was a shepherd. Rabbi Akiva was a shepherd. It was clear to me that if I wanted to get a little bit more in touch with my religiosity and Torah, I should be a shepherd.
Okay.
For me, it made sense.
Okay.
I shot the idea out of the water almost as soon as I had it, though, because I thought to myself, where on God's green earth am I going to be a shepherd? Who's a shepherd today? So I decided I'd be a little more dreamy and a little more realistic about maybe doing something else in touch with agriculture. And I thought maybe I can go and pick grapes on a vineyard and somebody might teach me Torah by candlelight. I was really, really dreamy about it. And I started calling all these vineyards, right? I looked on the wine bottles and the grape juice bottles and I just called their numbers. And I asked them, do you guys have a Torah learning program? They're like, listen, if you want to come and pick grapes, we will pay you close to nothing and you'll be really tired and you'll have a great time. And even if you want to learn Torah at the end of the day, even if we could find somebody to teach you, you will be so wiped out, you won't have time. So I thought to myself, and I actually said out loud to my roommate, I guess I'm going to have to be a shepherd. And then in one of the religious classes that I was taking at Wujis, the Rabbi Yonatan Pesach, started talking about two righteous people that he knew in his life. The only two he'd ever known. One was a secular kibbutz member, and one was a person from his settlement in Susia, a shepherd. I just blanked everything out until he was done, and I pounced on him after the lesson, right? I was like, I just told my roommate the other day I want to be a shepherd. And here you're talking about a shepherd. And I was really excited. And he somehow thought it would be a great idea to encourage me. And he says, if you want, I will set it up like that. He snapped his fingers, and I was like, yes, it's going to happen. He actually took me out to Susia, and he introduced me to the farm, and that I wound up being a shepherd on and living on for 5 years. And he didn't really know at the time how he was going to do it. He told me later when he snapped his fingers and said, I'll set it up like that. He didn't know what he was going to do. And part of the reason for that is that the farm was run by a widow. She had 9 children, and her husband had been murdered in the Intifada the year before. He had been murdered like 300 yards away from his house, and they were still kind of picking up the pieces at the farm. They had his understudy was the shepherd at the time. They had a whole staff of like 5 volunteer hands, like young kids who didn't want to be in high school. And here I come along, this wide-eyed American saying, how are you guys doing? It's great to be here. They looked at me like I was nuts, like I had dropped off the moon. I walked up to the shepherd, and he says, what's your name? And I said, it's Bobby. And he says, that's not your name. And I said, yes, it is. He said, no. What's your name? And he kept asking him until I gave my Hebrew name, which is actually the name I was, my bris name was Ezra. When I was growing up, I didn't know what Ezra meant, but Ezra means help. And our rabbis teach us that when a parent gives a name, it's like a kind of prophecy. And they have a little spark of prophecy when they're giving a person's name that kind of identifies them. And ever since I started going with my Hebrew name, it's come out more and more how much I love to help people. And for me, that's my identity today. I really enjoy helping people.
So this is amazing. So you were a math teacher, become a shepherd.
We're living in a stone hut.
Okay.
A little better than a tent. Built very sturdily, but the wind didn't get through the walls. You're
dirt
right.
floor. Yeah, I know. I walk the dog. I'm by Dahlia's farm every single morning. So why don't you just explain to the listeners the beautiful farm we have here? I mean, it's
incredible. Yeah. So like when you think of a farm, it's not a farm. This is more like a homestead. Yeah. You go, this place, it's all been built up. None of it is planned ahead of time. Everything was put together very sporadically and spontaneously as it was needed.
Well, that's all the time we had. We had to let Ezra go, but he graduated from being a shepherd, and he today is married with 4 children, living in Kiryat Moshe, neighborhood of Jerusalem, and he owns and runs a computer repair store. If any of you want to get in touch with him, please contact me on the chat or email Natalie@IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. We will be right back with Zezy Fuld. Don't go away.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobiker, your political hitman.
Political Hitman airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Returning Home. We're speaking today with our old friend Zezy Fuld.
Thanks for having me again.
We've been talking about the real need for aliyah now, because of the election situation in the U.S., I don't see any other option for Jews in the U.S. I mean, I don't know what they're waiting for, really.
It's not even about the election, really. I mean, if you're watching what's going on in America, in the Jewish area specifically, but throughout, it's actually pretty much insane. The things that people are allowed to say, people are allowed to get away with. You're watching what's happening with Twitter and Facebook, and every single time Donald Trump texts something out, it says, this is not true. Or, I mean, often people won't say something to your face, but when they're behind that computer and they're behind that keyboard, they'll say what they really think.
And that's policy. I mean, it translates just because it's on.
Yeah.
That's
100%.
That's the scary. That's the frightening reality.
Right. And that's really the scariest thing. And that's what I was saying. I don't think this is about the election at all, honestly. I think that people in America, need to wake up. Before we made Aliyah, when I was 14, the newspaper came down to our house and did a little bit of a write-up on us. We made Aliyah almost 20 years ago. It wasn't a time when a lot of people were making Aliyah.
Okay, what year was it? Tell us the year.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly when it was. It was 2000, at the end of 2001. I remember because my parents, I think I told you this once before, but my parents were on the way to the Aliyah office on September 11th, 2001. And they were in the office when the towers came down in New York. When the Twin Towers came down, they were there. So
where was that office?
That office actually was in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, in the city. And Nefesh B'Nefesh
in that old JCC.
Office. Yeah.
On Arch Street.
Exactly where it was. On Arch Street, exactly.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. That's exactly where it was. So yeah, it wasn't a time where people were making Aliyah. So the newspaper article wanted to do a little bit of an article on us, and they came to our house and they asked the parents all the simple, why are you making Aliyah, yada yada yada. And they came to me and they said, listen, you're 14 years old. You know that in 4 years you're gonna have to do the army. Are you nervous? Are you scared? I turned to them and I said to them, you know what? If I get murdered here in America, or I get killed here in America, I could see myself going up to Shamayim, up to heaven, and God saying to me, listen, why are you there? Like, what were you doing there? I gave you a home. I gave you Eretz Yisrael, and you're still there. I said, if it happens in Israel, at least I know God's not going to ask me that question. Why were you there?
Really? That's what you said,
I said, I've been there many times at night, and I actually feel much more comfortable. I know that for a fact in New York, I felt much less comfortable walking around at night than I do here in Israel. In Israel, I have no problem driving, even nowadays, driving to my brother out in Karmei Tzur, which is right by the Kiryat Arba. You're driving through Arab villages. I feel pretty confident driving through those areas. 2 days ago, I went to the Kotel on Shabbos. I walked through Shar Shechem. That's a Damascus gate. It's not a gate that people normally walk through, but because it's the Arab part of the old city. But all of the people there, all the soldiers there, everyone's wishing you a good Shabbos, and it's beautiful. It's what it is. This is home. It really is, and it's not like one of those cliches to say, "Hey, this is home." It's really home. This is it. This is what we got, and we're clinging onto this American dream because we're like, you know what, the Holocaust can't happen here, but just people need to open their eyes. Things are scary there, and they really are, and it's scary everywhere. I just prefer being here. I had somebody recently tell me, listen, because your elections in Israel were so great. I was like, I agree that the elections here sucked as well. But the bottom line is I'm in Israel. Right. I don't really care what happens with the election. Right. At the end of the day, whoever is prime minister doesn't run the world. God does. And the bottom line is I'm here. I'm home. That's what it's about. Who cares what all the other nonsense that I can't control in the world? I can't control that. I can't control where I am, and I'm here in Israel.
We can make them, there's a lot of infighting here. So what? There's a lot of politics here. Okay, a lot of games. Yes, that is true. But it is our home. It is ours. And even walking through Shar Shechem, even driving on Kvish Shishim, the Route 60 that Zezy was just talking about, where I live. Yes, there's rock throwing and there's problems here. But you have a different feeling here. You're not. Maybe it just happens after time, but there's no fear. It's like, this is ours. You kind of stick your chest out a little bit here because it's ours.
This is my home. And you
Yeah.
know what? I always tell people I prefer to fight amongst my siblings than to fight amongst my enemies. And you know what? In America, you don't really know who your enemy is. You don't know who's against you. You don't know who isn't.
Well, it
But you know,
used to
here in
be
Israel,
so. It used to be that the Jews were together in America, and
right?
I'm sure in some places they still are very tight, very strong Jewish communities. I don't know if I agree with you there because
No, that wasn't what I meant. I meant fighting for in the general sense, meaning when we're fighting for something in this country. I know that here we're fighting for the Jewish state. We're fighting for a better home for Israel. Who are they going to allow into the
So
country?
internal policing and an internal,
right?
Fine.
And,
That's government.
and
that's fine. That's fine. That's
but
government.
what I'm saying is I'm happy with that because
because it's a high level.
Right. The Jews are very, very together, and I think that you were 100% right about that. The Jews are very, very together because they know that there is an outside effect of everybody else kind of thing. But you know what? It's getting a little bit more mixed up as the years go on. As more Jews get into government and as more Jews feel more and more comfortable, I used to teach history. It's scary looking at Nazi Germany and what Hitler was talking about and saying, listen, these guys run our banks, they run our money, they run everything. We got to get rid of them. I'm like, that's what many liberals are talking about. They're saying that the Jews run everything.
Yeah. I'm not a fear monger either. Okay. I love America. I grew up there. Okay. My family's there. But yeah, it's not the Jewish homeland. It's not. There is a Jewish homeland. It's Israel.
Right.
And people who are there for 2 generations, 3 generations, 4 generations. When your family started out there, it was because there was no other place that would accept them. But now there is.
Right.
We lost you a little bit. So start over. When you say they're doing their due diligence, are you saying they are applying to leave? They are contacting Nefesh B'Nefesh, opening a file, and making plans, or are they just talking?
Yes, that's what I mean. I mean, no, I don't mean talking. The talking thing has, I think, been done and is the past already in America. I think people at this point, not only think, I know there are many that have already submitted their applications to get their American passports and Israeli passports, and to submit their applications to Nefesh B'Nefesh, because they need to know that they have an exit plan to get out of the country.
All right.
I think certain people have opened their eyes to that option and that understanding. As I said before, 3 of my cousins, Biden won. The next day, their houses were up for sale. These are big houses. The people who have a lot of money in America, the people who have a lot of things to stay for, and said, I'm not staying. I got to get out of here.
Okay, well, these are Zionists that are related to you. Most Americans, like my own family, they're not going anywhere. They voted for Biden. Everything's going to be fine. What do you say to the 75% of Jews that are those?
I think it was 72. What do I say to those Jews? You know, there's many stories in Nazi Germany of people saying, listen, don't worry about it. It's my neighbor would never do anything to me. You know what? Stop being so fearing and scared of what's going to happen. And, you know, there's numerous stories happened in Nazi Germany of the neighbor who was the good friend who ratted them out, or the neighbor who was the good friend who opened up the gas chamber to let them in. These are known stories from Nazi Germany. All I'm saying is if you voted for Biden, kol hakavod, it's what you believe in, and I hope that you're right. I hope he's not as bad of a president as I think he could or will be, for at least for the 18 months that he will be president, until he's deemed not able to be president and Kamala Harris becomes president. For the world and for Israel, I hope he's not as bad as I think he is. But what he's said and what Kamala Harris said since they've been elected about reopening negotiations with the Palestinians and reestablishing financial system to the Palestinians, when you tell me that you're going to reestablish financial help to the Palestinian people, all it means to me is more of my cousins will be stabbed in the back.
Yeah.
It means to me that you're giving them the wherewithal to say, you know what, you're giving us more money, fine, we'll go back to pay for slave. We'll go back to you kill somebody, I'll pay for it. And when you tell me Kamala Harris,
no, it's not. No. Wait, slow down. Let's clarify here for all our listeners. It's pay for slay. it's not when if they kill someone, they are paid for it. It's even worse. It's when they kill a Jew, they are rewarded.
Right, and it's not just them. Even if they die, their families get rewarded through the Palestinian Authority. It's not like, and I'm not even just making this up.
No. We all know. We're all very familiar with what goes on there. Their desk in school becomes a shrine. Okay, like stadiums and streets are named after the killer is a hero.
Since this is just my 2 cents, and honestly, I don't want to get into politics, but I do think that since Donald Trump became president, that foot on the neck that they received from Donald Trump said, if you behave, we will sit at the table and we'll make deals together and we'll work together. But if you're not going to behave, we're not going to do that. And that's a reason I think that Bahrain and UAE and all these other countries are coming to peace with Israel, because they understood that if you don't want to make peace with Israel and you don't want to behave, the Palestinian people, I feel for them. They're stuck in a governmental situation, and the government doesn't let them do what they need to do to be a people. The Palestinian people can be a people if they got stopped voting.
They have corrupt leaders. They just have corrupt leaders. It's that simple.
But they keep on voting for it. They keep on voting for Hamas.
They? We don't know what's going on there. We don't know what's going on.
Right. I mean, who knows how election fraud actually works?
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.